Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode. This is no ordinary episode. Rather, this is actually the collection and compilation of my talk from Podcast Movement Evolution Chicago 2025. I had the great privilege and honor of speaking there, and thanks to my resources as well as some close friends of mine and coworkers who helped put together some footage for this. I was able to capture the entire event for the most part on camera, and I had put that together as an episode both here in the video format as well as to all y'all just listening to the audio only version. It is available as both a video and a podcast. I'm doing this little introduction to explain a few things. The way it was set up, there were multiple round tables. I was presenting to everyone. I had at times the groups discuss individually among themselves, where I went and talked to each table, and then I had them represent their tables with an answer to me in front of everyone. Due to the nature of that event style and due to the fact that I had no microphone, I have the recordings, but the microphone that I was wearing on my person was not able to pick up everyone laughing, everyone's questions, everyone's discussions. And so if you're listening or watching, you'll kind of hear and see that at parts it is going to kind of fast forward. And that fast forwarding is just when the tables are discussing amongst themselves or with me, or when they were asking their own question. Now I did repeat everyone's question. That way y'all could know what was asked. And so everyone there could know. And so listening to this talk while we fast forward through the discussions and the questions are repeated and answered, and the discussions, you don't hear the actual discussion themselves, but when the people appoint their representative to discuss what they answered, I repeat that back. So again, I just wanted y'all to understand what was going on. It's just the discussions and the questions being fast forwarded. Other than that, this is my talk at Chicago Podcast Movement Evolutions, and I hope y'all enjoy. Again, I'm greatly honored and humbled to have been able to present the talk and to also share with y'all now. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy it.
All righty. Well, howdy, everyone. It looks like most of the people are here, so I'm going to go ahead and start, and maybe some people will trickle in, but I'm glad all of y'all are here. I want to start first and foremost with gratitude and humility. I believe that it is truly important that no matter where we go in life, that we stay humble, that we maintain humility, that we give appreciation and recognition where we should. So I got to start by saying all the praise and thanks to God for bringing me here. This wouldn't be possible without him and what he does for me every day. And then secondly, of course, everyone sitting here, without y'all, this wouldn't be possible. So I'm very honored and glad to have y'all here tuning into this. And even if it was just one person, I was ready to bring my all. But to see so many people, such a range of people, it really cheers my heart. And I'm hoping we're going to have a great time. And so I'll start with a brief introduction to myself. Now, if you've ever heard me on someone else's podcast, you know I'm very long-winded, but I want to give time for Q&A. So I'll be keeping this brief. I'm Mr. Whiskey. For those of y'all who haven't met me, I was a nuclear operator in the United States Navy, and I've turned into a podcaster and entrepreneur. It was kind of like it called me. You know, I didn't really see myself doing that, but here we are today. And my podcast started out Couple O Nukes, and it's evolved into Couple O Nukes LLC as a company for not just the podcast, but for speaking, for writing, for community building, creating events, and working with nonprofits. We do a lot of work in suicide prevention, addiction prevention, mentorship, mental health, and a variety of topics. And comedy is part of that. I do perform stand-up comedy, and I like to try and integrate it into stuff as a medium through which people who need to connect that way can feel connected and heard and listened to. And so today we're going to be talking about leveraging comedy to address dark subject matters such as suicide prevention, traumatic healing, and all of that. But I want to take a step back as far as I can while still staying on track and talk about, prior to leveraging comedy, how do we integrate it into our show? How has AI changed that? And should we even do that? Is our show designed for that? can we have that? What are the pros and cons? And I know a lot of y'all are thinking, it sounds like I'm overthinking this, but weighing those pros and cons and analyzing your show is crucial to its success. We have seen in the celebrity world and even maybe in your own workplace, people who have been canceled or had their career ruined because of one bad joke. That's all it takes. Your show is not an exception from that. One wrong joke could really break down your entire show and your reputation as a person. So we're going to get into that. Now, I want to start with when I was a young boy, my father and I on Sundays would watch this faith-based motivational speaker. And I always thought it would be cool to get to do what he does. I never really saw it, but here we are. And I said to myself, every time he shows up on Sunday, he does the same introduction. He says that it's a beautiful day in Texas and he's glad everyone's tuning in. And he says, I like to start with something funny. And because we're talking about comedy, because we're talking about podcasting, I made my own little podcasting joke. I don't think anyone's going to like it, but I loved it. And so as a nuclear operator, a lot of people assume that we're super smart, and we are, but we're very strange. And so I'll get this question often, Mr. Whiskey, how many nuclear operators does it take to change a light bulb? And well, it's pretty complicated. You need at least two of them to argue about what type of light bulb it is. You need at least two of them to fight over who's putting it in right, who's putting it in wrong, one person supervising, and then another nuke to come in afterward and redo the whole thing because he has OCD. And so people will say, yeah, but can you put an exact number on it? And I always just say, well, I'd have to say it's just a couple of nukes. And that's a reference to my show. And for those of you who didn't laugh, we're going to be talking about how comedy is very, based on opinion. So not every joke is going to be for every person. And when you're integrating it into your show, you got to keep in mind your audience. And so what I want to do is have y'all discuss at your tables right now. As a podcast host and guest, especially hosting, what do you think the most important thing is? There's a lot of different skills we have to implement, mindsets to have, business ideas to put into place. But I want y'all to discuss among yourselves real quick. What do you think the most important thing is that anytime you guest, anytime you host, what should you be thinking about? And I'm going to come around and talk with y'all about that. Righty, folks. So what would you say it is? I know you work marketing side, so you have a different perspective, but for all the podcast owners here, what do you think it is? The number one thing that is crucial to the success of your show, the growth of your show, retention, what do you think it is?
Listen.
I see a lot of good conversation happening over here. What are the brainstorms? So you're talking about a hamster wheel of just conversation that's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So you hold on to that for when I go back up there, and y'all just continue discussing. Both of y'all can speak if you want. I see some great conversation going on over here, y'all. So what are we discussing?
We appointed a representative.
Yeah,
Well, I had them appoint a representative. So if you want to just wait for when I'm up there, you can. But I was hoping to just hear, were there any disagreements over here? Okay. Hold on to that. I'm going to call on y'all in a little bit here.
Okay.
All righty. If I could have everyone back up here, we're going to go table by table. So starting over here, if I could get your answer to what is the number one most important thing when you're hosting and guesting that you should keep in mind as a podcaster? Right. So meaningful conversation, connection. Over here, what did y'all decide on? All right. So listening, connection, story, and perspective, making sure the conversation, again, with that meaningful conversation, is it going somewhere? Because you can have a meaningful conversation that is just a conversation, but what is the perspective? What is the message? And are you listening to the guests and to your audience? And then back here, Right. So paying attention to that feedback, whether it's messages, whether it's delivering on what you said, and having that connection, not with just the guest, not with the host, but with the audience as well. So these are all great answers. What I believe is most important that any podcast will fail without this is authority and reputation. So what I mean by that is delivering consistently and meeting the expectations that you set forward. So that might be from the description of your show, it might be the way your show has been done for a set amount of time. But what separates you from the thousands of other podcasters? We all have affiliate links. We all are fighting for sponsorships. We're all fighting for the same audience sometimes. So what is the difference? Yeah, we have our branding and we have our perspective, our personality. But the most important thing is authority and reputation. If your audience cannot trust you to deliver as promised, or your reputation has been compromised, then they're not going to want to buy products from you. They're not going to want to sponsor your show. They're not going to want to listen, especially your long-term listeners who feel like you have sold out or compromised their morals or changed the show in a way that is just completely different or without being transparent about it. It's going to be over for you. The easiest way to see this is with political biasing. If your show is meant to be neutral politically, but then you're coming on and you're going far right or far left, you're going to lose the people that want a neutral space where they don't have to talk politics. Or you're going to lose people on the left if you go far right, or people on the right if you go far left. So you have to deliver as expected. The same thing goes for comedy. If your show is dry, professional conversation, one-on-one, that intimate, we're getting into the research, we're getting into the trauma, and your show is never comedy-based before, and then suddenly you start making it casual, funny show, the people who have been listening, who want that serious conversation, are going to feel like you have compromised on who you are, and that's not the content they want. In the opposite direction, if you are a casual, funny show where people don't need to think hard, they just put you on in the background, they feel like they're having a drink with you, and suddenly you're bringing up all this serious stuff, whether it's politics, whether it's trauma, whether it's just serious conversation, they don't want to tune into that. The reason they're listening to your show is because it's what you say it is. So integrating comedy can be dangerous because you can change your authority and reputation. And without that, you will lose your current audience. People tuning in are going to think your show is one thing and then it's not. So it's very important because retention, you want to keep your full-time listeners. We always say if you have 1,000 people who listen to your show, but they just show up one time, or you have 100 people who show up every time you put an episode out, what one would you prefer? You want the people who are showing up every time because they're going to invest in your community meetups. They're going to invest in your products. They trust you. If you lose that, you're going to see your numbers drop. That's important for download, for retention, for people who just listen to your show one time, don't want to go on your social media. So they want to follow you because they like your show. They're making time out of their day, especially if it's not just a commute to work. They're saying, hey, this is something I do. And we've seen statistics now that people are doing it as a family activity, a group activity. Couples listen to the same show together. So you have to deliver as promised. So let's say you want to integrate comedy into your show. So how do you do that? There's a lot of different ways, but the most important part is that transparency. The way you maintain authority and reputation, besides consistency and meeting those expectations, is you communicate, you hold yourself accountable. So if you mess up, you hold yourself accountable, but also you set those expectations. You say, hey, my show, I want to move in a lighter hearted direction. It's just too dark and I'm not in that mental space to have that right now. Or I've been listening to feedback and people want this. When you communicate that, you have set that bar of standard and expectation, and now you're going to meet that. So you have maintained your reputation and authority. And if anyone tries to say you have compromised, you say, no, go back to my social media posts or my show, my description. Here's what it says I'm going to deliver. This is what I'm delivering. Now, integrating it can be a difficult thing to do. To be honest, your show might not be designed for comedy. Some shows just aren't. And if you have that permanent base of people who are showing up over and over again, you might lose all of them if you change your show. So how do we go about it? We've seen a lot of social media apps from YouTube to Instagram putting out a trial error for reels or for thumbnails. For your show, you might say, hey, ladies and gentlemen, I want to try integrating comedy for a little bit. And I would love your feedback, especially, is your audience receptive to it? And are you as the host feeling like you're delivering what you promised? In the same way, if you're moving toward a more serious direction, that transparency and saying, hey, I'm going to try this out. And if it doesn't work, but if your show is not set up to merge comedy into it, it's not the end all be all. You might have to start a new show. And there's nothing wrong with having a serious show and a casual show. So it's important to keep that in mind. Where AI comes in is now we have AI tools that can analyze our show. You can upload transcripts. Some of them you can even hook up right to your RSS feed and you can see all the episodes and it'll even clone you. So now you can say, hey, my show, you understand it, right? You've analyzed it and you understand the style, the format, the audience, who's listening. You can kind of look at your statistics and say, who is listening to my show based on the feedback, based on the social media, who is my audience? And then you can have the AI generate a plan for you. Hey, how do we integrate comedy? And it's going to say, well, based on your style, here's this, this, and that. Because there are different styles of humor. A lot of podcasters have banter where it's just accidental comedy. You're talking with a guest or a host and y'all have a different type of synergy together. Not every guest who comes on my show, it's a funny time. Sometimes it's a serious time. Sometimes a joke goes over their head. Sometimes you have to edit jokes out. In fact, I actually had to hold myself accountable because I slipped up and I put out a dirty joke on someone's show and I said, hey, my content's faith-based. I slipped up. Could you edit that out? So holding yourself accountable is so important. And going back to the transparency, holding your guests accountable. Some people, they don't allow cursing on their show. But if you don't communicate that with your guests, that's going to be more editing work for you, or you're going to have to leave it in. I've been with plenty of guests who say, hey, is it okay to swear on your show? Or is it okay to joke on your show? What kind of humor is allowed? Am I allowed to make political humor? Am I allowed to make dirty jokes? Can I do dark humor? It's so important to communicate with your guest or your host. How are we going about comedy? And not a lot of people bring that up, which is why it's important to ask, take that initiative, say, hey, I like to use humor to talk about my trauma. You know, it's my trauma and I like to poke fun of it, but not everyone is receptive to that dark humor. You know your audience. Is that something you're okay having on your show? And I'll give a great example. I was on a show and the guy is a friend of mine and I like his show, but he puts in sound effects, these funny sound effects. He posts like little memes over the video and he doesn't tell you up front. So there's a lot of professionals having a serious conversation on that show. And then suddenly they're watching the replay and there's these sound effects and they're upset like, hey, I was making a serious point and you detracted from that. You detracted from my authority. So it's important as a guest to ask the host, what is their style with the show? How do they edit? How do they handle humor? And then as a host, it's important to say, hey, by the way, I know we're having a professional conversation or we're talking about something that's really personal to you, but I'm going to be adding in sound effects because honestly, my show is supposed to be a bit more casual while still having that serious topic. So again, transparency is so important as a host and as a guest. And so that's what I want to focus on is when you're leveraging comedy, you have to analyze your show, the style of your show. How can you integrate it in? You know, do you have to choose a certain style? And just like when you're starting a podcast, we've all started a podcast and we've had, you know, our 10 episodes that were kind of this style. Then we had our other 10 that this style. They say most people don't know until their 20th episode what their show is going to be. I myself, my show used to be almost 2 hours long every episode. I've dropped down to 45 minutes to 60 minutes because the retention is much better. And it was just better for the conversation to avoid, as we said over here, sometimes we ramble on. Sometimes, and I've had guests who I had an episode 45 minutes straight to answer one question. So it's important to hold guests accountable. And even if you have to pause the recording, whether you're using Zoom or StreamYard, if you have to pause and say, hey, you're kind of doing this style of comedy and we don't like that on my show, don't be afraid to hold people accountable. If they're a true podcast guest and host, they will respect your audience, they will respect your authority and your platform. And if they get upset about it, like, hey, this is who I am, then you're not in alignment with each other. It's important, like I said, that authority and reputation lies on alignment with your show and with your guests. It's important to continually make sure that you are aligned with your show. And that goes for the integration of humor as well. And this applies to your social medias as well. Hopping on trends because people think it's funny on Instagram might not align with your audience. It might not align with your show. And a lot of people don't like when people just hop on trends because it's a compromise of character. You know, so it's important to keep that in mind as well. Now, I want to take a little breather here and give y'all time for questions if anyone has any questions. Yes, ma'am. So I want to repeat her question just to make sure everyone heard. And it's, do I find it difficult as a host of a show that talks about suicide prevention, addiction prevention, traumatic healing, all those dark subjects, to find guests who are willing to integrate comedy into that conversation? Now, maybe 50 years ago it would have been, but we live in a day and age where podcasting has blown up into $1 billion industry, where there are Facebook groups, Instagram groups, where there are WhatsApp chats, and you can find there are plenty of shows out there who specifically focus on only using comedy to address, maybe it's cancer, maybe it's medical ailments. So there are so many databases now that have been formed. So by going to those shows, and I'm not saying just go steal all their guests, but by networking with them, you can find out where are they finding these people. You can make posts now on Facebook, on LinkedIn. Hey, I'm looking for podcast guests who want to integrate comedy into this subject, because the important part is not everyone likes talking about this stuff. I've been plenty on first dates where I'm talking about suicide prevention and I never got a phone call back, right? So it's important to have that social awareness. And so finding those guests, you have to have that in mind, like who wants to talk about this stuff. There are plenty of people who do it because there are people who are receptive to that. If no one liked having comedy integrated into conversations that are dark, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But people sometimes need humor to take off some of that trauma. Some of us are very empathetic. When we hear about this kind of stuff, some of us start crying. Some of us have had personal experience. Based on my show, I can say for sure that almost everyone here knows someone who is an addict or has taken their life. Those are the statistics. The suicide rates in children alone have gone up well more than double. But when it comes to guesting, we also know, based on the podcasting industry report from Alex Sanfilippo, that about 44 guests reach out every day to hosts on average to be on a show. Maybe it's through your emailing list. Maybe people just find you through your website, however it may be. If you put forward, even in your show description or your social media post, that you are looking for guests to do that, they're going to come find you, because there are people who want to put value into the world by using comedy. There are plenty of comedians who are just comedians who do that stuff. They're not even podcasters. But would they guest on a podcast? A lot of people, when given the opportunity to be on a show, they're like, heck yeah, I'd love to do that. And so you can find it by putting out posts or having people come to you. And like I said, there are shows dedicated to this. So obviously there's a database for it. So it's just a matter of how do you want to search for that? And when your show, like I said, when you're transparent and upfront about it and people know that's what you're looking for, they're going to come find you. So I don't find it difficult. Now, like I said, you might have to have a conversation about it to make sure that they're not, like you said, too funny for your own good, in the sense that their humor is detracting from the message, right? That's one of the important parts too. You can go too far off, the humor wheel, and now people aren't taking you seriously enough. That's why I talked about, if you're a professional dry show and you're having those serious conversations and suddenly you're a jokester, people aren't going to like that because they're going to think you're not serious. I've had plenty of people when I was in the military. I love to do humor because a lot of the guys I served with were depressed, were suicidal. And, the military is well known for dark humor, and not everyone appreciated it. I had some people say, Mr. Whiskey, you don't take any of this stuff seriously. And I do. I stopped suicides by force. I had to be in those situations. But I also believe that if we can be funny together, if we can build that camaraderie, especially in the military, then we should. But hey, the people who said, Mr. Whiskey, we don't like that, I didn't do that with them anymore, right? Podcasting is the same way. And that's why I said you can try that trial and error, right? I mean, if you're saying, and that's why I said, if you put it up front, hey, I want to try integrating humor, everyone give me your feedback. And if you have a loyal fan base, they're going to tell you like, hey, we like it, but maybe you could do a little less of this or a little less of that. And it's important too. I mean, we have conferences like this. We have the online communities. Talk to other podcasters who have done it well. You talked earlier about finding guests, finding hosts too who run this type of show. You could say, hey, how have you found the balance? How do you balance it? How is your audience receptive to it? What lessons did you learn along the way that you would love to tell me now so I don't make those mistakes, right? It's one of the beauties of having talks like this, of having shows. You can put forward lessons and values so people don't make the same mistakes. So if you integrate comedy poorly, make sure you tell everyone. Make sure you tell other people trying to do it so that they can be held accountable and not make those mistakes. And it's not the end of the world either. If you hold yourself accountable, if you apologize, you say, hey, everyone, I tried being someone I wasn't. I thought I had good intention with it, right? I don't believe anyone here is trying to make fun of people who are suicidal or who have cancer. They just want to connect with them in a different way to be able to have that conversation that many people can't have. So if you show that you have an authority and reputation of good intention, of good moral character, and that you want to help, they're going to be receptive to that. Did anyone else have any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Right. So the question was, if you're guesting on a show, and obviously if you're hosting your own show, you have the power of editing, right? It's pretty easy. But if you're guesting on someone else's show and you slipped up and you made a joke that isn't in line with your character or your brand or your show or your business, how do you handle that? Do you say right then and there, wait, everyone, that joke I just made, that wasn't funny, or that wasn't true to who I am, and I shouldn't have said that? Or do you wait till afterward and reach out to the guest or the host? For me, when I had it happen, I reached out to the host and I said, hey, and if you have your after Zoom call chat, like most of us have, where you're done recording and you're in the chat room, that's the best time. Make sure you follow up by email, because a lot of us as podcasters, we get very busy. Sometimes we don't edit episodes until weeks or months later, and you forget that little statement, especially if you enjoyed the joke or you didn't find an issue with it. So holding your host accountable, I would say in person, afterward, and then in email. But if it's something where you can't edit it out, definitely say right then and there, hey, you know what? Explain yourself. Like I said, people, if you're authentic and you say, hey, I slipped up, or I wasn't trying to come off that way, they're going to be receptive to it.
And if they are, that's on them, right? And as long as you do your part, if you're there for it,
No one can really try to tear you down because you have the proof right there. So it's really up to how you feel. Now, I've had some hosts where I'm like, do I trust them to edit this out? Have I had some hosts where I asked to edit something out and they didn't? And now I'm like, they already put it on YouTube. They already put it on 20 plus platforms. So it's how much do you want to risk it, how bad it was. So you can call it out right then and there. If you do, typically, you might be able to have the host hit the stop button on recording and be like, all right, what's going on? And you explain the situation. And they might set it up for you get back to recording, you say, get right into what your apology is or whatever it is. So I think it's good to do all the above. Multiple layers of accountability and of that reputation authority maintenance are better, right? The more you do, the better. So have that conversation and then follow up via email. Make sure you follow up and make sure you're keeping track of when your episodes that you've guested on are coming out, so you don't forget, because there's going to come a certain time period where you're like, oh man, that episode came out 3 weeks ago. I forgot about it. And now who knows how many people have heard it. And is it too late? People will say it's too late to apologize for something, but we've seen plenty of people apologize for jokes that were made a long time ago. And do they mean it or not? It's about, do we feel like, does the audience and potential future listeners believe and trust you? And that's going back to constantly being consistent and showing up and meeting those expectations. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Alrighty, again, I started with gratitude and humility. I want to end with it. Thank all of y'all for being here. There's a lot of other, speaking engagements going on right now, but y'all showed up and allowed me to show up. So I really appreciate that. And I'd love to connect with, there's a lot of close friends of mine here, but for all your new faces, I look forward to connecting with you and seeing how we can work together, whether it's comedy based or serious, whatever it may be, and however I can help you connect with others.